we now can, and I will report soon, there are now 4.9 million children as of today with the Children's Savings Account. And amazing. We tested it with preschool kids, elementary school kids, middle school kids, and high school kids to figure out what worked best, what was most effective. Every child in New York City, as of last September, starts with the Child Savings Account in kindergarten, and now every child in the entire state of California. So I'll get to some of that data as we go. Um, but the way we got to children's savings is we had first done a national demonstration with adult match savings accounts to help adults buy a home, start a business, invest in their own education. And what we saw is that children started doing what their parents were doing, and they asked to save themselves. And we said to ourselves, wouldn't it be fantastic if we started earlier? And we all remember the Albert Einstein quote that compound interest is the most powerful force in the universe. And we always listen to him. So with that, I'm going to do an overview of children's savings, a state of the field, and then with that, open it up for any questions you would like. So what are children's savings accounts? Typically, they're just long-term savings and investment accounts for children. They almost always start in kindergarten, but in California, they're also starting at birth and in kindergarten. So the earlier, the better. And they are accounts that you then can use upon graduation from high school. They are saved for any type of post-secondary education. And I know that's very important in the broad economy today, but also here in West Virginia. It's not just four-year college. It is community college. It is trade schools. It is specific post-high school skills training or others that would allow a student to pursue their education to get them ready to be in the workforce, however they may choose. And every program combines incentives in a unique way. Here, you've provided an initial $100 deposit in an account, and in the process of deciding how do we build those accounts over time. There are many different ways to provide incentives, and there also are some very interesting programs in middle and high school which provide financial incentives for specific actions that in the past have really restricted the options of students. You don't take an SAT and suddenly your options are foreclosed. Let's encourage you to take that exam so then you have more choices when it comes time to choose your post-secondary education. And then we restrict account withdrawals. So just a short story. They started a program in Washington, D.C. called the College Success Program. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. It was founded in Washington State, and they opened it up, and they didn't have any restrictions on who could take the money out and for what. And when the kids got to their senior year in high school, they discovered that the money was almost all gone because their parents had taken it or others had taken it. And so everything they had tried to do, basically, they didn't have the resources. So I think basically safeguarding this one investment is an incredibly important thing. So how do these programs work? One of the huge benefits of what we're doing here is that we have 20 years of experience of things that work and things that don't work. One of the things that we've learned is it's an account for everyone. So it's universally eligible. Rather than having an account just for low-income people or low-income children, where suddenly it's the program for the poor kids rather than the program for all of us. And it also allows the integration of financial education at every grade level. One of the things we've talked about is the fact if you just teach a financial education class once, it's not going to stay with the kids. But if you integrate it, what's appropriate in first grade? What's appropriate in second grade? In third grade, suddenly that becomes a part of what they learn all the time. One of my favorite thoughts was one of our partners was a professor at Harvard Business School. And he basically said, let's see if we can change some of the questions on the SAT from those questions I remember of the train going in one direction and the train going in the other, and when would they hit each other, to real questions about finance and financial capabilities. Then we'll have all the schools teaching to this without giving them the burden of an additional curriculum that they have to do. Second, it's automatic enrollment. I know there is a College Promise program in West Virginia, and the very first College Promise program you may be familiar with is in Kalamazoo, Michigan. One of my board members, who was one of the four undersecretary of the Department of Education, who's now running the National College Promise, was brought in to assess that program and found out that the kids who took advantage of it are the kids who would have taken advantage of everything, and the kids who didn't were the kids who needed the most help. And so, how do we think about actually providing the kind of support that they need? And so one of the core things is everybody gets enrolled and you have to opt out rather than having to select to come in. And we've seen this change who benefits and how they benefit all over the country. And then the third piece is really creatively applying incentives. So universal enrollment, but there can be a way that the lower income children may get additional amounts of match. Or there can be special programs for certain communities or certain neighborhoods, depending on what the needs of those are. One of the most interesting developments is in New York City, where you don't think of it as being the most community-oriented place as compared to here. They actually have designed their New York City Rise kids in a way that the community has control across the board and helps to design the programs just as the Community Foundation is doing here, that works for a specific school or a specific county. And that to me is really the secret to success of how these work. So as we did our national demonstration, we had a lot of funding for very sophisticated research, random assignment, all this stuff. But there was one study that did more than all of that very expensive research to scale children's savings accounts. Basically, we discovered, I know you're so excited. All right. There we go. Basically, they discovered that a low-income student with an account dedicated to saving in their own name is 3 times more likely to attend college and 4 times more likely to graduate, even with less than $500 in the account. And this goes to what Diane was saying before, that essentially, as is the case with many of you, I knew I was going to college from the day I was born. I probably didn't know that day, but soon after, right? It was a total expectation in my household. Every report card, my parents took me to the bank, money went into my savings account. It was never, ever a question. That is something called a college saver mentality. One of the key pieces, and we had a very robust discussion about this at the Community Foundation yesterday, is that many children don't have that advantage, don't have the privilege that I did. And in fact, by being part of this community, they then can be part of having the aspirations, as we talked about before, to think of what they will do after high school, that it's not the end at high school, that it's the beginning of a next chapter. And I also want to give you insight about how children's savings complement the very, very important work of scholarships. So I gave a speech on children's savings at Harvard many years ago, and a man comes up to me and says in one of those sentences that really scare you, "You are the solution to all my problems." And it was Michael Lomax, who's the head of the United Negro College Fund, which is one of the largest scholarship providers in the United States. And he said to me, "We are now discovering that scholarships alone do not do the job. We get to the kids too late. They do not have efficacy in the decision making. And he said they're dropping out not because they're not prepared for college. They're dropping out because of the financial insecurity of their households or their families. And as a result, he said, we need to pair our very robust scholarship programs with the child savings account program so these children learn about this opportunity from a young age and don't just get the idea when they're juniors in high school, oh, this may be an option. So the two pieces work together in a very, very powerful way. And I know that this community has incredibly generous investments in scholarships. And so how those work together, I think, can be a real strength in this community. So Diane began this. Why do we think children's savings are important? As Diane said very powerfully, it's not just income, it is also wealth. And the ability to build assets over time has been very, very critical. Most programs, most social programs focus on income. That is necessary, but as we always say, not sufficient. And we look very carefully at the wealth divide by race, by geography, and others on how we begin to reduce that divide in key places. Assets behave differently than income and also offer a sense of security over time. And that's what a child savings account does. It accompanies you in a very steady way over 12 years or whenever you start it to be able to build the opportunity and savings. We never say that the child savings account is going to pay for everything. Not that. But it pays for a piece and readies you to figure out how to make the whole thing work together. And then, as we know, wealth distribution is very unequal. And we've also talked about how access to workforce development opportunities, particularly in different communities, vary very dramatically. So as we think about preparing our future workforce and the future economy for this, children's savings, I think, can play a very critical role, not just for the children, but for the other community partners and players that become engaged in the futures of our children. So what are the goals overall? What are the shared goals of this field? And the first is really, how do we increase the number of children who complete college, 2-year or 4-year college? We heard about the stunning statistic, and or career training. How do we raise that number over time? And as Diane said, we have nowhere to go but up. And so that's exciting with every child we add. We also use this to address the racial inequities in educational attainment, which are very, very significant nationally, and to really promote economic mobility or asset building. One of the issues here is that this is a huge opportunity for first generation college students, community college students, or other types of post-secondary education to really think of that if they didn't have the model at home to be able to pursue education. How big is the field today? Who are you joining? What's your community today? As of the end of 2022, there were 4.9 million children and youth with CSAs, which is a 300% increase from 2021, which is the first time we were able to count New York City. Just think, in 2016, there was just 313,000 children's savings accounts. So this really reflects a very powerful dynamic in people understanding how important this is and how much it can add to a community. In the past year, there were 5 new children's savings accounts program, and I want to say how proud I was. Even though I'm no longer president, Prosperity Now still puts out an annual state of the field. They highlighted just 3 programs, and your program was one of them, because they want, yes, They highlighted Cal Kids, which 3.1 million, and then they highlighted our future fund, 27. So, but together, right, it makes up 4.5 million. And I think it really spoke to the innovation in your program of building an endowment to support it, connecting it to scholarships, encouraging people who provide scholarships to say, why don't you provide some funding for children's savings and continue to do scholarships? How do we integrate those two fields, which is really being very ahead of the field in how they're doing this? And all these programs have learned, as you have, to do automatic enrollment. So you don't add that barrier or that obstacle to how people can get engaged in the program. As of today, we have 128 active programs in 38 states and the District of Columbia. And what's very interesting is the breakdown and who's running them. So 65% of the programs are run by nonprofit organizations. There are several community foundations who are doing this and an increasing number who are getting very interested. This is such a natural role for a community foundation, given its proximity to the community, the respect it holds in all the educational institutions, and the connections that can work together with that. 31% are by local, state, government agencies, or county-wide government agencies. They're just about to launch a children's savings program in the county right next to where I live, Prince George's County, a county-wide initiative. And then 4% by educational institutions. And that kind of gives you a sense of the diversity. The overwhelming percentage of accounts are with the government institutions because of the scale at which they are operating. And with that, what I will leave you with is the next slide, which is a bunch of resources which we can share of a blueprint for how we design this. You've already done that because Diane has studied that blueprint more than anybody I know. We launched the campaign for Every Kid's Future to create, particularly for lower income communities, a national match pool to bring outside funders in to help match your children's savings. And key research, University of Michigan is where Willie Elliott, who did the groundbreaking research on the college saver mentality, continues to advance children's savings accounts and has just done case studies of 5 of the longest term programs, one of which is run by a community foundation in Indiana.